At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo of the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, a leader in next-gen core services, and a big shout out to patrons and Facebook subscribers, as always, for everything. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if it wasn't for all of you, but especially all of you that are watching, listening, supporting, sharing, all of it. So thank you so, so much. And it is January 23rd as of right now, but when you hear this, it'll probably be a few weeks later. So we've got a lot of powerful stories, a lot of great conversation coming out, and just a lot of bonus content and everything that is coming out of not only the podcast, but Within the Trenches media as a whole. So make sure to look for all of that stuff. We've got a lot of things coming up, and we are starting to get into conference time as well. We are, heading right into it. There's going to be a lot of speaking engagements that I'll be involved in, some virtual stuff, and then, of course, recording the podcast at different places, also doing Imagine Listening. And one of the things is trying to build up right now is going to different dispatch centers and doing Imagine Listening there. Historically, it has been done at conferences, whether it be state conferences or national conferences. Actually, the only other place other than conferences that I've done Imagine Listening is at the Mayan Ranch, and that was with the 360-degree dispatcher. That's with Joe Serio and his group out there. Make sure to check them out if you haven't had the chance to, but that's the only other place. But that's one of the things that I'm trying to do is take Imagine Listening kind of on the road, so to speak, and just going to different dispatch centers and doing Imagine Listening there, sharing those powerful, but at times emotionally intense I Am 911 stories, but also it doesn't stay emotionally intense because the last portion of that ends up being open mic, where we share all the funny stories. So make sure to look out for all of that. And I am super excited for my guest today. My guest today is Wendy, and she is a former 911 dispatcher as well as a now peer support recovery specialist. Let's welcome Wendy. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am super excited to have you on here, especially just from the time that you ended up submitting your session for Dare to Be Great 4, and then getting to be there as you were doing the presentation, and just the amount of engagement and everything that came along with it. I knew I had to have you on and kind of dig deeper into your story. So again, thank you so much for being here and for the job that you do. I always start with everyone on, how did you get into dispatching to begin with? Now, you have kind of, for public safety as a whole, you have about 15 years, right? And but for dispatch, it was about 7 years.
Yep.
And how did you get started to begin with? So do you come from public safety family, or do you just jump in green?
A little bit of both. So I
Hmm.
had an uncle who was a volunteer firefighter, and I remember him, when I was a child, he'd be at the dinner table and the pager would go off and he'd jump up and run out the door, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But other than just seeing him go through those motions, I didn't have any other connection to it. I didn't know anybody in law enforcement. I didn't really know anyone that worked in the centers. Except through like mutual family friends, but I didn't know them well enough to really know what they did on a daily basis. And so I'm in my last year of high school and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do next. College wasn't really an option at the time for financial reasons, and I wanted to stay close to home. And so between my uncle and some other people that I knew, they're like, well, they're always hiring at the dispatch center, which should have been my cue to stay away from it when they said they're always hiring. But I was like, oh, no, it sounds like a cool opportunity. Let me go check this out. I applied probably like December, January of my senior year, got hired in March, actually. So I'm still going to high school during the week and I'm training at the dispatch center on weekends right after I turned 18. So yeah, I just sort of fell into it from there and really loved the constant chaos, the variety of the days, and said, this is what I'm going to do. It was good money. It was close to home. It was stable. It provided me that level of stability I never thought I'd have. So I just went with it at that point.
Oh man. So that's crazy. Okay, so let's back up a little bit here.
Mhm.
So I can see you, I can see you as a kid sitting at the dinner table and stuff, and hearing that pager going off, and your uncle just just taking off, right? So
Right.
you're sitting there. Did you ever ask your parents or even your uncle, like, what is that like? Or do you remember hearing some of that traffic? Like, was there ever any other conversation or elaboration onto what it was that he was doing?
There was, and it's funny. It's funny now to me. I don't know that a lot of people watching this will find it funny, but I'll share it anyway. There was always a joke with us if he went to like a car crash or something that was really bad, and he talked about like having to scrape up pieces off of the pavement.
Oh,
That his favorite thing after that type of call was to go home and like eat a big plate of spaghetti. Like that was just, so it was that kind of like crude humor that
right. Yes.
on very early. So then when I got in the dispatch center and I started to hear that, from coworkers, it was just very natural because I had heard it from him from those situations.
Right, exactly, because those who are, not involved in public safety or have never been around it, no
Mhm.
friends or nothing like that, you would listen and think, "Uh, wait, what? Like,
Uh-huh.
how dare you? Like, how could you say that?" But, like, for those like us and others who are into it, you're like, "Ah, I know what you mean."
Right. It's just another call. You have to kind of compartmentalize it that way. And that's what he was doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you end up going
Hmm.
and you're training while still in high school.
Yep.
Now, this is why I said it's crazy because I can't imagine, and I think there's been a couple other people that I've spoken to have who have had a similar story where they're in high school, but um I want to hear this one from you as well. So, you're in high school, you're taking, all these different subjects and everything, but you're also training for dispatch at the same time. Was
Mhm.
there anybody who knew you were doing this? And if they did, was there a bunch of questions?
There were a few that knew what I was doing because we're a big community on volunteerism. All the
Uh-huh.
fire departments are still volunteer. So we had a couple junior members of the fire department that were in the same classes with me. I wasn't super close as far as like friends with them, but they did know that I was starting down this path. And then I had maybe like one or two friends that really knew that I was getting into this, but I didn't like widely share it because I don't think I wanted that attention or I wanted those questions. And what helped with that too is I wasn't in school all that much. We were allowed to take a course to be able to work for so many hours a week. So I took like two classes that senior year and then I got out early because I had that job outside. So I really didn't get to see a lot of people either. That helped.
Oh man. Yeah, no, I know what you mean because I had something similar where we had what's called, Votech,
Mhm.
And I can't remember how many days out of the week. Actually, it might have been every day, the last hour, but it was, like vocational stuff. So you would go there and there would be like something techie that you're learning, or now at the one in the area where I grew up, but also the county that I was working in, they've added a criminal justice part. And so they have some of those students end up going into the dispatch center and everything. So I kind of wish they had that when I was there. But also, there was like a student aid thing that I did as well. So there were 2 hours
Mhm.
where, just like you, I would be out of it, and everyone's like, "Are you still going to school?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm here all the time. You just don't see me.
Mhm.
I'm not skipping," which I did skip every so often for other things. But during that time, I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. So
Mhm.
so with the training and everything, I have to ask, like, how did that impact you being in high school? Because there are a lot of different things that go on in high school, right? And
Mhm.
there's enough stress in high school, that anything, going on. But now you're adding a layer, a public safety layer, a first
Mhm.
responder layer, dispatch. So how did that impact you?
In that moment, I don't think I really realized it, because
Oh.
I didn't have much of a life outside of that.
Mhm.
I was one of those people that had a very small friend circle, mostly just did stuff with family and those couple of friends. So we weren't like going out partying. I wasn't looking for anything else. I was seeking that stability more than anything.
Mhm.
So I looked at it as like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to basically be working between going to school and working 7 days a week for March, April, May, and then I graduate the early part of June, and then I'll have that break and I'll have like a normal life at that point. So it was very like short term for me that I was thinking about having to do that kind of schedule.
So, do you feel like, though, while you're going through all this training and everything, even though you had, an uncle in the fire service and
Mhm.
such, but, later on in high school and you're going through this training, do you feel like being in high school, in a way, kind of prepared you for some of the stuff that you were going to be dealing with? Because, I mean, you have to admit, sometimes the people that are calling in, it can be like high school a little bit, like some of those conversations.
it Some of the conversations were very
Mhm.
dramatic, and I've always been just kind of like a very easygoing, go with the flow, hold my composure. I'm good at letting other people kind of talk and just doing the active listening thing. So a lot of those skills that I had from being in high school just transferred right in.
Oh, man. That's pretty awesome. So then, um, how long were you training then? And also, when you ended up going on your own, were you already graduated from high school, or are you still working towards graduating?
So the center was short staffed, like all centers are, and I
Yeah.
think it's gotten worse over the years, but they were short staffed at that point. Um, they brought on me and another girl together who wasn't in high school, so she had better availability.
Mhm.
But we did most of our training somewhat together, and I was cut loose sort of midsummer, just because people wanted to take their vacations and they thought, I had enough of it down. Some of the supervisors lived close enough. If things really went south, they could have got there in a couple of minutes. So I was technically cut loose sort of middle of the summer after graduation. And then I didn't go to the academy, though, to go through my formal 2 week training until September. So I
Oh.
kind of get cut loose and then I got to go back through training, but then I'm already, cut loose by the when I'm going back to winter.
Right.
Which is really ironic.
So, I mean, so you're doing all of this. What are the hours like then? I mean, because everyone is they're different. There's swing shifts, there's all this other stuff, but then you've got like straight 8 hours, or you've got straight 12 hours, and then you've got overtime as well. How did that work for you while you're still in high school? Because I know, like for me, I wasn't in high school anymore, but it was basically like a part-time type schedule, and it continued like that after training.
So they did 12-hour shifts, 6A to 6P, and then 6P to 6A for the night shift. So
Oh, man.
obviously, while I was still in high school, I could only do the the daytime hours, which
Yeah.
was really nice and kind of spoiled me a little bit. But then as soon as I graduated and I had that open availability, I'm technically supposed to be part-time. We had a couple people that were out on different medical issues and needed to do some shorter shifts. So I start doing a variety of some 12-hour days, some 12-hour nights, some 6 hours to fill in for the other person for their medical leave. So it was kind of all over the place. And even though it was part-time, I mean, I was still working full-time hours some weeks.
Wow. And at this agency, are you doing all disciplines like police, fire, EMS, 911, like all of it, or is it just calls and like how did it work?
It police, fire, and EMS, and we did both call taking and dispatching. So
Snaps.
it was learning a little bit of everything. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so are you already like full on taking 911 calls still like towards the end of your like still in high school?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I definitely started taking calls probably within that first month.
So the reason I ask is because that adds even more layers, right? As you're in high school, you've got these tests, you've got stuff that you're studying for, and when you work in 911, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but when you work in 911, you end up hearing things that you kind of never dreamed of. You wouldn't that there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes in because it's 911, right? You know why people are calling 911. But also in high school, your mind is wrapped around different things and taking calls like that. I can't imagine taking some of these calls and then going to school and sitting there for hours, in different classes or whichever, walking through the halls and seeing people just living their life and you possibly walking through the hall thinking, man, if you guys only knew the kind of calls that I've been taking or, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Just stuff like
Mhm.
that. How was that for you?
Well, I think that's where it helps not being in school a whole lot. I
Ah,
didn't really have
yes.
time to get grounded in it and think about it in that way. But then I think even from those early days, I was already compartmentalizing stuff and trying to keep things very separate because I
Mm.
didn't want that overlap. So yeah, I was just kind of keeping quiet and not letting it seep out into other areas of my life.
So for those who knew what you were doing,
Mhm.
did they also, and I kind of asked this already, but did they also have kind of those questions where they're like, so what are some of the crazy calls you're taking? And, any of that stuff? Because if you think about it, even with your closest friends, if they know what you're doing, there's that question is always going to come out.
Yeah, there was maybe like one or two of them that
Hmm.
that really asked things, and I would share a little bit with, but not so much because, like I said, I really kept it under wraps. I didn't let a lot of people know that's what I was doing.
It's probably a good thing too, because there would have been probably a lot more questions.
Mhm,
Now, you've gone through the training. You're already, as you said, a month in, you're taking calls,
mhm.
and you're going to school and everything as well. Do you remember your first call, or even some of those earlier calls that you had taken?
I don't remember the very first call.
Hmm.
I do remember some of the early ones, and some of them are kind of funny that I remember. There was one, and I took this during that first summer. There was a porta potty that caught on fire on our greenway, and
What?
yeah, we did. It was apparently some kids, playing some jokes and caught this thing on fire, and I was like, we don't have a call type for that. It's kind of a structure. It's kind of not.
Right.
Like, what is it? So I put it in the CAD as like other fire, and then when I toned it out, I'm like porta potty on fire, and so like all the fire guys start calling in on the phone, and they're just having like a field day. They're like, what did she say?
Oh man.
Yeah,
Well,
was really that was like the earliest one that I remember because it was so funny and got so much attention.
Those are probably, one of the best things that happens, excuse me, when you're in 911, right? Because there you can end up getting like just a bunch of shit calls.
Mhm.
And then it's almost as if the universe knows that you need something. And a call like that comes in and you're like, "Oh, okay, we're good." You know, you're
Uh-huh.
able to laugh a little bit because laughing is good medicine. And in this type of profession, man, some of that you definitely need. Otherwise, it's just hard call after hard call. And if you
Mhm.
don't get a chance to get up and move around, you're there. So, man, I I remember being in dispatch and having those types of moments, having back to back CPR calls and just thinking, please, please give me,
Give me a
give me
break.
something else. Yes. Because I'm getting hit with all of this. And I'm going to ask you this here in just a second, but my center, when I was working for the county, the phones were on one side, and then on the other side, it's main radios. And then in Michigan, they call it lean, but it's just like running NCIC and plates, warrants, all that other stuff. Um, and when you're taking calls and you're by yourself, it's just over and over and over. So for you, when you were in, what kind of setup was there? Like how many dispatchers were on at one time, or was it just you, or was it you and one other person? How was it for you?
In that county center at my first role, it was
Mhm.
always two. And we did have a third section that was set up that like a supervisor or someone else could pop in and help out if they really needed to. And then there was also a console, like a backup console in the director's office, but always the two. So that was always good for me. Like I was never by myself in those early years. Now, when I transferred to the park service later on, that was solely me. We worked 1-2 a shift, except for the busy time of like tourist season. We would have some overlap.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And it's the reason I asked too is because um the first center that I worked at, which was like a city PD, um, it was just me for 8 hours. And man, when it went to hell, it would go to hell because for
Mhm.
whatever reason, people like to set cars on fire in orange groves. And when those things go up, man, it's like poof,
Mhm.
and it gets crazy. And then so it would just be me trying to contact the Department of Forestry and all of these different people to get out there. And you talk about multitasking,
Mhm.
being an octopus. it it would get crazy. um but it was also, in a way, and those who are not in dispatch, they won't understand this, but by saying it was fun. It was fun multitasking and doing all these different things, but also because that everything that you're doing is helping the entire situation. You get that satisfaction, right,
Mhm.
of what it is that you're doing. But damn, sometimes you need that little bit of funny to just kind of
To
break
break
up
it
the
up.
chaos. Yeah, that can be
Mhm.
911. So you're going through, you've gone through the training, you've already been taking calls, and you start moving forward. Now, you said you had mentioned the first place and then there was a second place. Where did that transition come into, and why did you switch? Do you just simply move, or how did that come about?
Oh no, I didn't move.
Mhm.
I'm still living in the same area, and the park service that I went to is maybe slightly closer. It's maybe 5 minutes closer to my house. But the main reason I made that switch is I met my husband at that first center, and so we were together working in that center, even as dispatch partners, for about 3 years. That was interesting. And a lot of people were like, oh, you guys have the perfect setup. You're working together, you get your time off together. It wasn't so perfect because neither one of us could move up. We couldn't have one of us supervising the other. Uh,
Yes.
that was a major concern. And then I just didn't like being pegged that way either, as like being a couple. I wanted us to have our individual careers. And we had seen some bad calls together in that center. And my husband handled them a little bit better than I did. And so I was just kind of ready to move on and try something different. So it wasn't like
Ah.
one major reason. It was a couple of things that came into play there.
I can see that, right? You kind of want your own identity and to switch back and forth. But on
Mhm.
the plus side, in a way, working some of those hard calls, you're there, together.
Yeah.
You're already when you're working with people, they become your second family, right? Because
Mhm.
you see them a
All
lot more. Yeah, you see them a lot more than you see anybody else.
the time.
And you learn so much about each other and everything. But here you have your coworker who now ends up,
Mhm.
eventually becoming your husband, which is
Mhm.
awesome. You meet there and you have that dynamic where you kind of know what the other person is thinking and just
Mhm.
working like a well-oiled machine, but also, having that time where you're able to just connect and
Mhm.
talk because I think a lot of times, um, for those who don't have, connections or anything like that, like we need people to be able to talk to, right? To be able to get through this. So in that sense, that's awesome that you
Oh,
guys had that.
it was perfect to have that built in, and even to this day, because he's stayed in that field even though
Mhm.
I've moved away from it,
Yeah.
um, I fully understand what he's going through, and that's really helped make our marriage even stronger. It's probably why we've made it. March will actually be our 15-year anniversary. So,
Nice.
yes,
Congratulations. That's
thank
awesome.
you.
That's excellent. So, as we're looking at all of this, your story, how you've come up and everything, what is and only if you feel comfortable sharing as well, but kind of a call that stuck with you.
Oh, I have several that
Mhm.
have stuck with me, and this is kind of the way I think about it. They always say in dispatch, like, the bad stuff comes in threes. And that was
Yes.
very true for like my worst calls. At that county level, there were three that I had that I ironically worked all of with my husband. We had an officer who got shot at. We had another officer who got hit head on. The one that hit head on was not the officer being a fatality, but the person in the other vehicle was a fatality. So that was a pretty serious crash.
Mhm.
And then we had a house fire of a family that I knew fairly well because my family had grown up pretty close in geography to them, where their child, and she was only about 3 or 4 years old, ended up dying in that fire. So that was my kind of trifecta of the calls that stuck with me from the county center. And that, again, one of the main reasons I wanted to get away from it and try something different at the park. So I did get away from those types of calls, but then I wasn't even at the park a year. I was maybe only there about 6 months. And I talked about being the only one on shift at that place. I go in one night and find my coworker that I'm relieving in cardiac arrest. So, yeah, so that
Oh,
wasn't
geez.
really like it wasn't a call that I took on the phone, but that turned the tables, and now I'm on the other side of it, and I'm having to call the local 911 center. Guess who's working? My husband is working at that 911 center that night when I had to call for help, um, and my coworker didn't make it. So,
Oh,
yeah,
geez.
all of that happened within a span of about 4.5 years for me.
So, wow. Okay. Hold on. I
Yeah.
was not expecting that at all. Holy. So you end up going through this, and
Mhm.
obviously, it was excellent in the way that your husband was there, right?
Mhm.
Because then you're able to talk about that even more because you were both involved. But
Mhm.
what was that impact like? And was there any type of debriefing, or was there anything that came from that?
The park did do a debriefing, and they brought in mental health professionals to kind of be around and help staff one on one because the person who ended up dying that night, he had been at the park for a long time. He was very well known outside of dispatch with all the different departments of the park. So it really did hit hard with the entire staff. I don't remember a whole lot of that particular time. Like that probably month to 2 months is a blur for me. I do remember talking with a counselor briefly and not really wanting anything to do with it. I also remember going to his celebration of life and people like being so glad that I was there and wanting to thank me for being with him in that moment. And I couldn't take it. And it's very ironic that we're doing this week because the 12-year anniversary of that event is Friday. And so it's been 12 years and it
Wow.
still has such an impact on me. I mean, I'm at a point now where I can talk about it and I've worked through a lot of it in counseling, but it is something that is always going to stick with me.
Oh, geez. That was yeah, another thing I did not know. But it's great though that you were able to get, the help that you needed, right?
Mhm,
And that you're able to talk about it now. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important for
mhm,
others, that if they're struggling or they've gone through something, to be able to reach out and get that help, because there's a lot of people who still are under that stigma, right? Where if you ask for help, you're weak. But that's not what it is. That's not the case. There's more courage and bravery in asking for that help because it's so hard. That first step, and you took that step,
mhm.
and you were able to get that help, and like you said, now you're able to talk about it more now. Um,
I do want to point out that I took
mhm,
too long to take that step. This is something that's very important when I share my story.
yeah.
All of these things happened from 2006 to 2011 is when all of these bad calls happened. And I bounced around from job to job. I isolated a lot at home. I did a lot of bad coping things for several
Mhm,
years. And it wasn't until 2018 that I actually went to a psychiatrist and took that step and got the help and got into counseling on a regular basis to get things really back on track the way they needed to be. So I waited 7 years or so in between there, and it was quite a treacherous 7 years. I'm very lucky that I had the support system that I had, my husband being able to hold things together both financially and emotionally and everything for us, and my parents, even though they didn't know half of what was going on. We kind of did an us against the world, my husband and I, hiding things from a lot of people. So a lot of people didn't know what all I was struggling with
mhm.
for years, and that's where it was helpful having him know what I'd been through. But it was also kind of a downside because he helped me hide it so well. Um, so I will say I waited entirely too long, and if I have any regrets about the entire journey, it's not taking that step much sooner.
I feel like, kind of the silver lining of the us against the world is also kind of taking it all head on. Even though there was the hiding, right? And there was other things. I feel like the fact that the both of you were so strong,
Mhm.
together as well, that the other side of that, the two of you against the world, was like, we're gonna do what we can to get through this, the both of us,
Yes.
against the world, taking it on. And look at where you're at now. I
Mhm.
mean, you're speaking, you are a peer support recovery specialist. Once you got the help that you needed, and you started to, kind of come out on the other side, so to speak,
Mhm.
I mean, was that really kind of a push for what it is that you're doing now, so that others, if they ever have issues or anything, going by your experience, you're able to help those who might have, some sort of heartache or are going through similar situations?
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest motivator. I often joke that, like, when I do the presentations, I don't know if I'm going to really connect with anyone or have any kind of impact because sometimes you just get the blank stares and you don't really know what's happening.
Yeah.
But if I can walk away and at least just get like one positive comment or one person send me a follow up email, that one person is enough for me.
How does that feel? I mean, the reason I ask is because of your journey, and, kind of like you said, those kind of 7 years where there was a struggle, there was a lot that you were going through, but to now kind of reflect on that, see where you're at now, and then have people reach out to say, "This is awesome," like, I needed this, I needed your help," or, whichever. How does that feel to now be seeing it on that from the other end?
Well, it reminds me of why I got into dispatching in the first place, because I wanted to help people,
Mhm.
like all of us that get into this field, that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
And I kind of forgot how to help people as, I went through the bad calls and then all the turmoil of my journey. I kind of got away from that piece. And it's brought me back around to being able to help people in a different way, and being able to help the people that are still sitting in this chair that maybe don't know how to take that next step, or where to look for resources. So it's being able to reach back out and stay connected to that population that I started with, because I always feel like I'm going to be a part of that family. I mean, it is truly a family, and you don't just get out of it because you leave the profession.
Right. Yeah. You're in it. Once
Like,
dispatch,
yes.
always dispatch. I love that you're able to come on, and share this. And I feel like we definitely have either a part two, or we have especially a dispatchers roundtable, to have a live audience and talk more about this, not just your story, but also, if anybody has questions, on some of the stuff that you're doing as a peer support um recovery specialist and everything. I
Mhm.
definitely want you back to be able to talk about more about this. I know that you've got another meeting that's coming up, but I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you here before we wrap this up. And again, it's been awesome to have you on here and learn your story, especially the whole high school thing. What the hell? That's awesome. Like
Went
that's
down a rabbit hole there, but it was a good one. Yeah, good
no,
memory.
yeah, definitely, because that's an aspect that I don't think a lot of people know about, right? So, um, for those who might be having, there's some struggling, some struggle, they're going through a few things, um, maybe similar to some of the things that you were dealing with, and they're on the fence of asking for help, or looking towards their loved ones, coworkers, whichever. What is some advice that you have?
Don't be afraid to make those connections through these
Mhm.
very like private taboo conversations, because that's the only way we break the stigma, is to start having them. And if you don't feel like there's someone, in your center, or in like your immediate family that's going to understand, I'm a huge fan of warm lines, because they're not like a crisis line. There's several of them. Usually there's at least one in every state. I know here in Virginia, we have Mental Health America that has a very broad one that's for any kind of topic. We also have one that's more specific for any type of first responder, that was started by a firefighter at Fort Belvoir.
Mhm.
So I'm a big fan of reaching out to one of those, and the people who answer those calls are certified peer recovery specialists. They're not going to ask your name, your location, any of that stuff. It's just more they're there to be a listening ear, and you can get out some of that stuff, and they're going to actively listen, and they're going to help you try to like come up with solutions or ideas. They're not going to tell you what to do. You're in the driver's seat, but they're just there as that like sounding board. Um, and they're a neutral party, because they don't know you personally, so that might be another good avenue to explore until you get to a place where you feel like you could maybe have that conversation with someone that's more in your life, or reach out to a counselor or something like that.
Awesome. And then final question.
Mhm.
If you could go back in time with the knowledge that you have now and speak to yourself in the beginning, what advice would you give yourself?
Don't do it. No, I certainly wouldn't be the person that I am today if I wouldn't have went through the experiences that I had on the job, because there was a lot of good. There was so much good that came out of it, and
Mhm.
I always have to remind myself not to go to that negative place, and remember all of the good that I experienced and all the good people that I met and worked with over the years. But I would just tell myself not to be so naive about what could really happen. I think that was a big part of it. Like, I just didn't know what could possibly happen. And these conversations weren't being had. So I would encourage myself to be brave and have those conversations, and make this not such a taboo topic anymore.
Awesome. Excellent. For those who might want to get a hold of you for um, just for what it is that you do or anything like that, how can people get a hold of you?
So the best way to reach me, I'm super active on LinkedIn, and I'm not very hard to find on there. So if you just put in my name, Wendy, and last name Bundy, Bundy, you'll see it, and I'll have a lot of acronyms after it. You'll see my MLIS, my MA, AHIP, and Certified Peer Recovery Specialist. All those acronyms are after it. So I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that has all of that attached to it. But shoot me a message on there, and I'm always happy to connect and have further conversations through that.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so very much for being on, sharing your story, and helping and doing what it is that you do. And we are definitely going to be doing another one. So thank you so much for being on.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. And maybe we can get my husband on it one day with us. Maybe you can do a conversation with both of us. That would be really cool.
That would be awesome. Yes. Okay. I will be right back here with you in just one moment. And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments or questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us. And that is going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital, a leader in next-gen core services. And if you want to be a subscriber of the podcast, you can check us out. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches podcast/support, or you can be a patron of the podcast, or do both. What the hell? It is always good to have your support. So thank you so much. And that is patreon.com/WTT podcast. You can see this on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, as well as Facebook. And you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.